Hello and welcome to the Argyle IT Solutions Expo. And my name is Vicki Lynn with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed closing keynote speaker. First, we'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Cohesity. Our sponsors are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. And anytime during the event or right after the event, you can visit their virtual booth from the main agenda page, and that does include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Thank you again for joining us today. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Ken Napton, CIO of Win Brands and author of Unveiling Tech Debt. We are excited to have Ken with us for his closing keynote presentation titled Tech Debt Takedown, a blueprint for modernizing legacy systems. Welcome, Ken, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with you today. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and talk a little bit about the very interesting and sexy topic of tech debt. I know that this is a topic that actually is on a lot of people's minds. Um, but I wanted to share a little bit of discussion around how we go about helping our organizations to pay off those tech debt payments, to be able to alleviate that tech debt burden that holds the company back from being able to achieve their strategic goals. That's really the kind of the summary of what we're talking about today. And so before we dive into the details here, I want to talk a little bit about the term tech debt and how that term has been used in the industry. So many years ago, this is back in the early 2000s, when the Agile Manifesto was kind of being formulated, and the Agile methodologies were coming into fruition. Ward Cunningham was one of the authors, one of the signatories on that Agile Manifesto, as was Martin Fowler, and they were talking about this concept back then. Now, Ward Cunningham actually coined the term tech debt, and he was talking specifically about custom software development. So as software development companies are writing software and releasing that out to the public, the developers might be making some decisions around how to build that software that were dependent upon things like, or driven by things like, the market window, or getting to revenue, or when they needed to have something out, right? The calendar, the release schedule. And so there might be times when these developers might make a decision that would inhibit the scalability or the growth, or just the general effectiveness of the software. So it's good enough to get it out to the public, but it's not necessarily what they had envisioned as the final product. And so they would get this out the door with some known issues. And then as they start to receive that adoption, the developers would be working on some of these changes to increase the scalability or increase the effectiveness or efficiency or whatever. And then they'd come out with another release at some point down the line. So that period of time where there was some features or some limitations in the software, that was technical debt, because that piece of software wouldn't scale for where they want to be eventually. And so they would have to go back, and before they could work on new features, they would have to go back theoretically and fix those problems that are not necessarily things that people are gonna see immediately, but that they would be underlying, behind the scenes kinds of fixes that would help that software to be able to do what it was intended to do. And that was called paying down the tech debt, right? So this is the term that Ward Cunningham came up with, and Martin Fowler also kind of participated in that discussion. And this is how the terminology of tech debt came to being. And it actually fits very well, because we think about debt, think about financial debt, paying down that financial debt, similar to tech debt. When we have tech debt in our software, we have to pay that down in order to then have the software achieve what it wants, what we want it to achieve. So this is kind of the origins of the term. So, and I started out as a software developer. This resonates very well with me, and I certainly recognize that sometimes there are decisions that we have to make, and they're not always bad decisions. It's just there are pressures around getting the software out the door, and sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, we're gonna set this particular thing aside, this scalability piece. We're gonna set that aside because we're not gonna have 100,000 users hitting our system on day one. So we can begin with this system that's unscalable. We can get that out, start to get some adoption while we continue to build this scalability, and then get that released in time that, you know, theoretically no one notices that was ever a problem. But we know as the developers that this was holding us back. So I certainly recognize that, and I think the analogy fits well, and I think the industry felt the analogy worked well, and so we've continued to use this term tech debt over the years. But as I have moved into the CIO seat, and I've been sitting in the CIO chair in multiple industries for 20 years, I tend to look at tech debt, and I think not just myself, but I think as the industry as a whole, we're beginning to look at tech debt a little bit differently. So the definition that I use for tech debt is not just limited to custom software development, but really expanding that out to anything within the tech stack of our organization that inhibits our ability to grow. So the definition that I use for tech debt is any aspect of the technological stack that would inhibit that growth of the strategic company goals. And this could be due to either bad design, or it could be due to something, you know, we weren't thinking about the future state where we want it to be, or it might stem from lack of maintenance of systems, right? We often use the kind of story in IT around, you know, that server sitting in the back office that nobody ever knows about, and you know, we don't necessarily keep up to date on patching that particular system because it's running some critical service and it just keeps running. And so since it's working, don't mess with it, and we don't want to patch it. It's just running. And then over time, of course, more and more and more crud builds up in that, or as Martin Fowler refers to it, cruft is how he refers to tech debt. So that builds up on that particular server because new versions of the operating system are coming out with new security patches and new whatever. And if we're not keeping up to date, then we're not just talking about one upgrade. We're talking about 5 or 6 or 7 major updates in order to get this particular server up to current. So that is tech debt, lack of maintenance of our systems. So as I look back on my career, various industries, various solutions, I see various uh, examples of what I consider to be tech debt that was holding back the company where I was working from achieving their strategic goals. So I'll just talk about a couple of them, just to kind of get our minds kind of in the same thought process here. It's not always custom software development. In this one case, the mortgage loan origination situation, that actually was custom development. It was for that particular company, but that particular solution, it was a scalability issue. We were not able to scale as the company was growing by acquisition. There was this software that company had built, and as more and more people started coming on the system, it started slowing down, and there was just this bottleneck that the system couldn't handle that number of users. And it turned out that was because of the database that we were using as the foundation of this particular system. So we had to swap out that database and then remove that bottleneck. And finally, we could then go and say, okay, now we can start growing the way that we wanted to grow. I was also working for a healthcare company at one point where we were doing a large acquisition, and the hardware of the company that we were acquiring had aged, and they hadn't done a great job of keeping that up to date. And so when we came in with our new EHR, the hardware that was there wouldn't run that. And so before we could actually start getting that momentum from that acquisition, we had to go and replace all of the hardware for these particular front end systems that were running the electronic health record. And then the example I was just using a minute ago, the proverbial old server. I was actually working for a company once where the servers, every year we wanted to put some budget towards upgrading the servers, and we hadn't done a great job of patching them and keeping them up to date. We were doing okay, but not great. But we were far behind from a major operating system perspective, 4 or 5 versions behind. And every year when we talked about upgrading these servers, the favorite term from the certain members of the executive team was, we're going to kick the can. Can we just hold on to it another year? We need to allocate this money somewhere else. Can we just kick the can? Can we just keep it running? And then next year we'll come back and look at it again. Well, that just built up over time. And then when we had some new system that we wanted to come and run on that server, we couldn't, because the server wasn't running the latest operating system. And this particular system that we wanted now, that was going to help us achieve some strategic initiatives, we couldn't put that on this particular server because it needed the latest operating system to run. And so that is tech debt. That's a decision or decisions that have been made in the past that are inhibiting the ability for the company to grow. So as we look over time, if we're not making those tech debt payments, whatever they may be, whether it's patching, upgrades, maintenance, whatever it might be within our ecosystem, within our tech stack, if we're not making those payments, then that cruft, as Martin Fowler referred to, just builds up over time. And that's this chart. The red is the cruft, right? So early on, it's just a little bit of tech debt. It's only one version of the operating system we have to upgrade. It's only one piece of the database, one piece that's holding back our scalability, whatever it might be. But if we don't make that payment, then over time that continues to build up and up and up, and our ability to innovate, or even just to deliver, reduces. And so that's where we find ourselves often, is in this situation where tech debt has been building up and we haven't been able to deliver. And now we have to invest a significant amount of time, effort, and money to pay off these large tech debt payments in order to get us back to the place where we need to be. So how big is this problem really? Well, I was recently at an event that was put on by Robert Half. And in this particular survey that they were talking about, 55% of tech leaders cited tech debt as a major obstacle in 2025. Quick fixes, over scalability, legacy systems that are hampering their ability to move forward, custom tools that require ongoing maintenance. And I would even say, not just these systems and these tools, but data itself can also be tech debt. As we think about the data that we've collected in our systems over the years, and the data hoarding, the data sprawl, we think about, how do we define a customer? And if this database defines them one way, this one defines it another, and this system has a different definition of it, or we don't have all of the data fields that we need to be able to correlate this particular customer across these various systems. When we try to bring that together, that could be a challenge, right? We may have to go back and change the way that we're storing our data, or gathering more information that we hadn't gathered before. And so data itself can also be an inhibitor to being able to implement new technologies. Another great example there would be AI. Right? AI is just exploding right now. Everybody's looking at, how can we make use of AI in our systems? How can we ride this wave? And the old adage certainly applies, that garbage in, garbage out. Right? If we don't have clean data, then we can take a great AI model and put it on top of that dirty data, and we're going to get garbage on the other side. So data itself can be tech debt as well. So there's several contributors to tech debt. I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but I think you're beginning to get the concept of this idea that tech debt is not just custom software development. It's really anything within our tech stack. And we've already talked about the data hoarding, the data aspect of tech debt. We've already talked about this concept that you have this short-term view of spend, right? Kick the can. Let's get one more year out of this service, this system, this whatever. It could also be pure licensing cost. Another example, I remember I was in a situation once where we had invested as a company in a platform. And this platform had all kinds of capabilities. And there was one specific capability that we were not yet leveraging from this platform. Uh, and so we were leveraging it for other things, but there was this one capability here that we were already paying for. It was in the budget. It was in the system. We just hadn't built it out yet. And we had 3 other departments that were using completely different solutions for that particular capability. And so, of course, from an IT perspective, we're saying, well, look, we want to start implementing this because then we can get rid of all of these licensing costs and these duplicate systems that take time and effort and maintenance to keep them running. That's tech debt. Having these systems, even though these systems are running and they're functional, it's tech debt because that's taking time and effort to keep this running. And we're spending money on licenses that if we put it all over here, it's already covered, licenses are paid for, and we have one thing that we have to maintain. So that's just another way to think about what might be considered tech debt within your organization. In this particular case, we had these 3 in place. We had this one that we weren't using. And then another department was saying, hey, we have this need, and we found the solution we want to implement. And it just happens to be this same thing that we have in these other departments, but completely different vendor, completely different solution. And I went into the meeting where they were talking about whether they were going to buy that or not. And our CFO was in there. And they went through their sales pitch of this is what we need. And as the leader of the IT organization, I said, look, it's a great solution. You've done a great job doing your due diligence here, but this should be our first implementation in our platform. It's already here. Let's build this out instead of buying something new and adding yet a 4th solution over here. And at the end of the day, I actually lost that argument. This department said, "Hey, it's only 50K. We've got that in our budget. We can cover it. We don't have to deal with IT at all." The CFO said, "Look, 50K, that's a drop in the bucket for this company. Go ahead and do it." Well, 12 months later, that 50K investment had ballooned to 320K because of that particular solution and the way that it was being used. And we still hadn't implemented anything over here in the platform. So that, again, pure tech debt, right? This duplicative capabilities within the organization. So as I've been thinking about this, as I've been going through this fight, I guess, about how do we reduce our tech debt over time, started to think about enterprise tech debt, started to think about it in these larger terms. And it hit me that we need to have a common business language that helps us to talk about tech debt in ways that our CFO, our CEO, and our board of directors will understand. So I wanted to come up with some common language for that systemic risk that tech debt creates. And this was actually from an IDC funded document that talked about technical debt resulting in unfunded liabilities that inhibit the ability to maintain normal operations, innovate, scale, and transform. Again, aligned very well with kind of my thought process around tech debt. So tech debt, like financial debt, must be eventually paid, or you can go bankrupt under its own weight, right? So I started to think about this idea that tech debt and financial debt are actually very similar. So you think about from a CFO's perspective, think about how do they deal with financial debt? How do they think about financial debt? How do they talk about financial debt? Well, we may need to take on some financial debt in order to meet a short-term financial or time-sensitive goal. It could be a strategic tool that we can. It's a lever we can pull, right? Get a little bit more financial debt to fund this particular initiative. And if properly managed, it can boost growth. It can also become a significant liability if we're not managing that over time. Too much financial leverage can prevent growth. And if it's not managed correctly, too much financial debt can kill the company. Well, you can go through all of these bullets thinking about technical debt as well. And these apply perfectly to technical debt, just like they do to financial debt, right? We may take on some technical debt in order to achieve a time-sensitive goal. It could be a strategic tool that we might use. And if it's properly managed, it can boost growth because it allows us to hit certain market windows. But again, if we're not paying that off over time, it can become a significant liability. It can prevent growth, and it can eventually kill the company. So as I've thought about this idea of technical debt, I wanted to find a way to measure our technical debt, specifically in the same terms as financial debt, right? So we talk about financial debt leverage. I wanted to find a way to talk about technical debt leverage. How leveraged are we as an organization from a technical perspective? And so this is kind of the meat of the conversation right here, right? This is what I really wanted to help everybody kind of understand and recognize that once we start talking about technical debt in terms that business people understand, then we can start to have a much more meaningful conversation. And so I came up with this with my team, came up with this model where we have these operational capabilities, these strategic capabilities, and if we go through our entire tech stack in an organization, we walk through that tech stack and we assess every element of our tech stack against these criteria. And you'll notice that I have a scale from 0 to 5. Not everything is measured from 0 to 5. That's why we see some not applicable grayed out boxes in here. But just for example, the stability and fragility, right? How stable or fragile is this particular software or this particular solution or this particular data set, right? Again, data can be tech debt, right? So when you think about how stable is this? How often does it go down? How often do we need to be restarting this particular system or service or whatever? Well, the scale of 1 to or 0 to 5 is probably not needed. So it's really just stable, unstable, or fragile. And so I've allocated those to 0, 3, and 5 for the scores. The supportability. What does it take to support this particular system? How big of a team do we need just to keep this running? What kinds of operational challenges do we have? What's the expected remaining useful life? So think about, most software at some point will have an end of life defined by the manufacturer, right? The operating system will have this is the end of the supported life of that particular thing. This is when it goes out of warranty. This is when it goes out of support. This is when it's end of life. So we know of those things. But what about something like an acquisition, right? And one that comes to mind might be the VMware Broadcom acquisition. Think about VMware as a key component of your tech stack. That key component of your tech stack is working fine. It's doing its job. It's performing well. And then an acquisition occurs. Pricing changes. All of a sudden, we're looking at this particular thing and wondering, well, gee, is this still does this still fit for our environment? Do the costs still align with where we were going? Or can we still afford this solution? And so the solution itself didn't change, but the model around it changed. So all of a sudden, you now may be saying, well, the expected useful life of this particular solution is now shorter than we thought because the finances have changed or the support from the vendor has changed. And so we need to find a way to roll off of this. Well, here again, that's not something that your operations team, that's not something that your executives are going to be excited about. It's behind the scenes. They don't care what virtualization system you're using, right? They don't care what stack you're running on. And so to go back to them and say, hey, we're going to have to take 6 months or 8 months or a year and X number of dollars to swap this for that, that's not helping move the business forward in their mind. But it is tech debt, because if we don't do it, then we're not going to be able to move the business forward, right? So what's the expected useful life? And then the footprint and span. How widely used is this within your organization? Is this something that's used by one department or one person, or is this something that's used widely? So those are the operational metrics. And then we have how critical is it to your business? And does it align with your overall strategic plan? Which again, we might go back to the VMware or whatever solution, right? Getting purchased by someone, maybe that takes it out of your strategic plan. So that would shift its rating. So the idea here is, if we're going to quantify tech debt, if we're going to be able to speak in terms of tech debt leverage, we need to measure our entire stack using this criteria. So here's an example. List out your various technologies and then measure those technologies. And now you have a single view of your tech debt leverage, technology by technology through your tech stack. And then, as you can see at the top of the sheet here, we can say we are 40% leveraged. Our tech debt leverage is 40% in this organization. So we're able to come down to a single number that we can now talk with our executive team about. So as we wrap up the discussion here, just a super quick example of how this works in real life. So this was a real life example. The spreadsheet was much larger than this. We probably had 250 things, technologies that we were measuring. This is just one snapshot of that. But as you can see, when we measured out all of our specific technologies, this particular company was 70% leveraged. And this was no surprise to our executive team. They knew that the IT department was not delivering as quickly as they wanted to. And once I showed this to them, I said, here's why. We're 70% leveraged. They said, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. That's not a surprise to us. Well, we decided to prioritize some of our work based on what shows up in red right here. So where are we the highest leverage? Where are we leveraged the most from a technology perspective? We tackled those things. This was about a year later, measured it again, and now you can see our tech debt leverage dropped from 70% to 50% because we used this model to prioritize where we were putting our investments. So the bottom line here is quantify your tech debt. And this model of leveraging, of tech debt leverage provides that common language to help you define how leveraged you are as an organization, and to highlight those areas, to look through the tech stack and bring out those red areas to go to your executive team and say, look, you want to know why we're not delivering the way we expect? It's right here. And if you help free up some dollars and some time for us to go and pay off this tech debt, to make these tech debt payments in this particular area of our business, then we're going to be able to start moving faster in our towards our strategic goals. So with that, I just wanted to kind of share some of the resources here that might be available for you. The specific kind of math that we talked about is all laid out in the unveiling tech debt that's available. I also, if you're an IDC customer, there are papers that I've written there as well with all of the math and all of that. But you don't necessarily have to use the specific model that I've shown here. It's one that works for me. The bottom line is quantify your tech debt. Don't just talk about tech debt in a nebulous term. Find a way to quantify it. Talk about it in terms of tech debt leverage. That's a term that your CFO, your CEO, and your board will understand. So with that, thank you very much for your time. And Vicki Lynn, I don't know if we have time for questions or if there are any questions, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Ken. What an excellent and insightful keynote presentation. I appreciate it. It's great to kick us off that way today.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will
Okay.
take any questions that come in from the audience, and we'll make sure those get over to you post event. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this session and all of our sessions. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. This does officially conclude the Argyle IT Solutions Expo. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Argyle Digital Information Technology event very soon, which will be our CIO Leadership Forum on October 14th, 2025. See you there and have a great rest of the day.